that you sent via email and via that survey will be the bulk of our work today. Just setting the expectations. We have this report due in June, backing up, knowing that we've got to get it to the governor's office 30 days ahead. That means the next 35 days or so are going to be a bit of a sprint. So we're going to spend our time today really workshopping the ideas in each of those categories. We're going to talk with you about what stakeholders we need to engage on some of this. And then we're going to be spending the month of May pulling a draft together and getting with all of you to respond to that. With that said, Adam, I'll hand it to you for the first piece.
Certainly. I love multitasking. I'm going to pass this on to Todd, Todd Blees, our GIS um, analyst, who's going to walk through a mapping tool that we are using to help us understand what's going on. This isn't quite available publicly yet, and I think one of the things we want to talk about is how or whether we want to publish this. So, Todd, if you're there, if you please unmute.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, and you can share your screen and get started. Thanks.
Okay, so we got the data from, I'm sorry, I don't really, from who did we get the data from?
The Colorado Future Center.
Our future self. Okay. And I mapped it out to basically the incorporated and unincorporated counties in which the different addresses fell, to the block groups which fell, and then I also have actual point data to show where the individual units are. So this is the map. Are you seeing the map okay? Yep. Okay. So this is a map of showing the incorporated and unincorporated areas. And basically you see that Denver, Colorado Springs, El Paso, Arapahoe have a lot. Unincorporated Eagle has a lot. I'm assuming that's from the ski Airbnbs and that type of thing. And then the incorporated areas up in Weld and Larimer have quite a bit too. These numbers are actually not that significant. We're talking about only for the largest ones, it's only 4% to 5.4%. I believe the largest percent of how this is percent of housing units as opposed compared to the total number of housing units. I believe the municipality that actually has the highest number, that 5.4%, is Fountain. I'll switch this over, show you get a little bit more granular detail by looking at the block groups. And this lets you zoom in better and see where exactly this is again showing percentage of the housing units that are part of the corporate inventory. Seeing down Colorado Springs, you gives a better breakdown of the Fountain area. Seeing a pretty good number there by Fort Carson. And if you zoom up to Denver, Aurora, you're seeing a pretty good number that are out in the more newly developed areas to the east side of town, eastern Aurora, and then also some in northern Denver in that Westminster kind of area. And if you come up here, you also see Fort Collins right around the college, Greeley right around the college, and Boulder you have quite a bit right around the college. Then if we zoom into the actual points, these are actually the actual locations for each of these. Smaller ones are the individual units. Slightly larger dots are the multi-unit duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes. And if you want to see just how much this compares to like what's actually there, compares to actual housing inventory, each of these blue dots is an address as well. So you can see it's not actually that large in numbers that we're talking about here compared to the overall number of housing units. turn that off. And then the other way to look at this is through a heat map, which basically, let me get rid of these. This gives you a better idea of the actual concentration of these. So again, Boulder up by the college, Denver, you got pretty good number downtown, and then out here to the east, and in Aurora. And up in Greeley, Fort Collins, you're seeing around the colleges again. And there's another option you can do here is filter. So you can see basically, I'm gonna filter it so you can see basically just the largest entities. So the entity sizes goes from 1 to 5. So just the largest. Oops, sorry, wrong one. This is a filter one. So if we go by entity size, so entity size 1, these are the smallest of the entities. So one's only own like 4 or 5. So you see, again, by the college, there's a lot. Longmont's pretty good at number. Loveland. That seems actually to be pretty common around these colleges. Out and right in the Denver area, it's actually not, it's more in the more established areas, I'd say, in Denver, central Denver. If we switch it over, so we're only looking at the largest, then you see it goes out to the more newly developed areas. Again, out in eastern Aurora, north of Denver. And if you go down, Carl Springs, it's kind of the same pattern. It's more out in the more newly developed areas.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We had a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
One person was asking, is this 1 to 4 unit residences, or does this also include multifamily housing units?
The ones are single family. When they get the multifamily, it gets a little bit harder to differentiate. I mean, the 4s, we've seen some places where we had like a whole condominium building that was labeled as 1s.
Yeah.
Basically, but then we looked at those individual ones, and they are actually owned. Each of those condominiums is owned by a separate company.
Gotcha.
So you're not seeing actually multifamily too much. It's if you see the 4s, it's a quadplex. 2 is a duplex.
And then on another side of that coin, somebody was asking, are new developments included in here? Those that are being built with the intent to sell them, but maybe initially shown as being corporate owned, or those that are build to rent communities. So they're built to exist as rentals.
I believe this data is all as of 2023. Adam can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it's not. So it's not including new development that's being built.
Right.
But like, Todd, can you zoom into Fountain, the specific, the property level?
Yeah.
If we get that hotspot in Fountain, is that a new development that's been put in, or is that actually a lot of scatter site?
I think the one out here is a newer development.
Okay.
Here, I think it's more military influenced, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because you have Fort Carson right there.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. But
Todd, could you do the same, what you just did here for Denver?
And I'm sorry, actually, before we do that, just quick question. Can you toggle onto satellite view for that one in the upper right-hand corner? Because I think that's a brand new development, which would tell me that the one in the upper right-hand corner at 1 o'clock. So
let me get rid of the heat map here.
I gotta believe that that's corporate owned in the sense that they just built it and they haven't yet sold it to end users.
Yep, that sounds quite possible.
Which tells me, again, by the way, I know there's a lot of neat stuff going on here, but what that does tell me is that those units, which I don't think anyone, at least I certainly don't think, are on our radar to be concerned about. That is to say, someone just built it and they just haven't sold it to the end user yet. Would be of concern, but we see that they are in this data.
Yep, And just checking here to see when the year built was is on the sale year 2022. Year built 2015. So
It
Yeah, I
couldn't,
don't
would
know.
you be able to tell if you have the same owner on these parcels? If it's a new build, a new development?
I can tell you if they are.
Sorry,
These are like
I know
the
you probably weren't
fives.
prepared for this, so I
No,
appreciate
Yeah.
it. But it
Oh,
just
it's
no,
fine.
no problem at all. Let me change the filter here. Actually, okay, I'm sorry. So that was actually filtered. So it was only showing the fives before. Now it's showing all of them.
But like,
Mm.
look at the very bottom, where there's a creek that run that one, yeah.
Yep.
So that's all. Those are, I mean, unless that's build to rent, which I don't think it is. I'm betting that's all a developer has owned those lots. They were platted and owned at that time. We're probably looking at imagery that's current, as opposed to when it was under development. But um, that suggests to me that this data does include developers who are building or were building at the time that the snapshot in time this data was taken. The developers were building them and then have with the intention of selling them to end users, and that is being included in this data as being corporate owned. Which I point that out because I think that's and again not this has nothing to do with you, Todd, but just so everyone is aware that that is now. I think that's pretty conclusively now in the data of things which aren't the core mission here.
Well,
So I'm not being critical of it. I'm just so we understand. Well, yeah, look to the right hand side. You see that where the new
Yep.
development's going on.
Yeah, I've changed the filter so it's all size 4 or 5. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
on the right hand side of your screen, I mean that's all. So we have here in the data um, stuff that would be of not concern. I'm not concerned that those are owned by a corporation. Because it's of course they're being built and eventually sold to end users. But but those are included in the data that we're looking at, included in the heat maps and the percent and the ownership percentage data that's being shown here for the record.
one of the things that's true about this data is that it first is a point in time, and we don't have a really great way of identifying homes that are under construction or have just recently been constructed and those that are not. Um, this is you know, um, a shortcoming, right, of our data collection method, I think. But it also illustrates some of the complexity that we will
Oh, that's
certainly have
okay.
a chance to
You can.
talk about.
Yeah, I would just throw out there for the group, which again, Todd, I don't expect you to do this on the fly, but I would suggest applying a filter to filter out any properties that if you take a snapshot in time, if this is 2023, I would apply a filter to filter out any units that were built within 2 years of the snapshot we're looking at, because it would not be surprising at all, and nor troubling from the standpoint of thinking about public policy that
Yeah.
a builder still owns some of the units there. And so I would just suggest that that be something to think about as you're doing these macro analyses, and zip codes that have a certain percentage of corporate ownership would be to filter out recent builds, because those are going to be the ones that are going to be in my opinion, overwhelmingly corporate owned, but not in a troublesome way.
And Taylor, just on that note, I think I'll carry those thoughts forward also as we go later into some of the data collection that people suggested be done going forward. Heidi, I
Thank
think
you.
at one
I
point
appreciate
you
you
wanted to.
indulging me.
Yeah. I think Heidi had her hand up first, and then I'll go to Frankie.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Todd. Sorry, I apologize for the background noise. They're looking at something in my office. Can you do what you did for Boulder, where you showed the existing units and then the corporate owned units for Denver proper?
Yep.
Thank you.
So, let me get back to I'll just use this one. Okay, so and one caveat on this, these blue points are actually all addresses, so it is including commercial in there as well. But when you get into the neighborhoods, you can see it pretty You can see the houses pretty well. And the red points are a little bit larger, so they are a little bit more prominent. It's a lot of points.
Denver's a little more dense. I do think that you see, I mean, just an observation. So I-25 is the sort of snake there. I mean, it's a little hard to tell, but you do see some concentration on the west side. Stuff that hugs I-20 or areas that hug I-25, it feels like, as opposed to like Hilltop, Crestmore, sort of the inverted L seems to have less of that, definitely. But it's a lot. It's pretty concentrated. And then obviously east, which is abutting East Colfax, where Denver and Aurora join. That's very helpful. And do we don't have access to this? Will we at some point in time?
I think we will. And we have
Okay.
to just finalize a few things.
Awesome, thank you. Well, one other request, can you shift? I'm curious about Green Valley Ranch and Montbello, if you know those neighborhoods.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, it's super easy.
So I'll look specifically in here.
Mm-hmm. In the summertime. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I do think it would be sort of illustrative to look at like Montbello compared with like an equivalent, neighborhood just to see the share by block, like just or even sort of the ratio of corporate owned to Montbello's a moderate income neighborhood, but look at like a Hilltop, for example. It's probably similar sized. Hilltop Crestmore.
Yeah, I think for that, this block group map is probably a little bit more useful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm guessing that this one's probably like new development out here.
Yep. Yeah, you're pretty far east there. Yeah, because there's Buckley. But you do, I mean, I'm looking at, so Montbello's up there by the Arsenal. I'm pointing, but nobody can see what I'm pointing at. Montbello, you definitely see some concentrations there, a bit in the GVR area. And if you go down a little bit, sort of central Denver, where we like the area sort of around Glendale, you're seeing fewer of those. So there's definitely there's Wash Park there on your left. In the higher income areas, the inverted L, you see less of that activity. And that's pretty consistent with the research that's correlated with home prices. But I mean, I do think it's telling. There is I would say loose correlation with where racial and ethnic concentrations are in the city anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely, just looking at this, definitely the concentrations like in this area here,
Yep,
Sunnyside or
that's Westwood.
Valley.
Mhm.
And then up in this area, and yeah, these are all definitely the more racially diverse areas.
And I mean, Denver's an interesting case in point because there's not a lot of new building going on, and hasn't been for a number of years. So I think it's easier to ignore that type of ownership. And we don't have, you don't have a major university like you do in some of those other areas. It's probably a little more pure.
But I would push back on that a little bit with respect to my friend Heidi. which is you're also looking at remodeling though, which is someone who buys a property to remodel it. I'm looking at Jefferson Park. Um, I would say if we did a drive by that in that concentrated area, I think what you'd see is that people have purchased it for the purposes of remodeling or doing a scrape or a pop top or something like that. Those are typically done through an LLC vehicle, but are typically also with the intention of selling to an end user. And so those absolutely would show up in this area. And so that concerns me because I think the spirit of the task force is to say, all right, what about housing stock, which might otherwise go towards owner-occupied housing, now being as rental housing? But what's clear to me looking at this is that new development, as well as anyone who's doing a purchase and a major remodel or pop top or a scrape and rebuild, is also included in this data. Though I don't think that anyone would suggest that would be of concern for the purposes of the task force. But I think it's clearly in this data, and providing what I would say is tinting the data for us. So I apologize,
No,
Frankie. I jumped in front of you. So,
Yeah,
but
no,
I do want to throw
I-
that out there as what I'm going to refer to as a major red flag in terms of thinking about the extent to which we can rely on what we're seeing here to infer the things that the questions the task force is tasked with looking at.
Yeah, and Teo, I think you're actually setting up where we're going to have to shift in a few minutes to spend the bulk of our time is what within the timeline this task force actually has. Are we prepared to act on versus how much is this surfacing of additional work that we need to do? I'm going to let us spend about 5 more minutes on this before we are going to have to move on. But Frankie, floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just have some questions to make sure I'm understanding what we're viewing. So we started off with saying that what was being displayed was the percent of total units. So just to clarify both that equation, it's a percent of total housing units that are 1 to 4 family residential. Is that correct?
Percent of all housing units.
All housing units,
Yes.
which would indicate that includes apartment buildings.
Yep.
Okay. And when you say corporate inventory, how is corporate being defined?
That is the parcel data that I was provided with. So,
Is it truly corporations or is it
Well,
all business entity types?
if I may, it's the variable is called entity type, and it's the 5 categories that we talked about in the RFP, the small, medium, large, but small, 3 to 5 up to the mega.
And it's looking at any business entity type. So if it's owned by anyone other than an individual's name, it's
Right.
included in this. So a
Right.
trust, an LLC, S corp, C corp,
Yeah.
anything. And it's not being differentiated to say if it's an entity that owns more than 1 to 10. The
It is. Recall that we had talked about, um, a structure of entity by size of ownership nationally, right?
Yep.
Going from very small, I don't have all 5 of the categories in my head right now, but to mega, and those mega is more than 1,000.
And the
Right.
mega is the blue.
No, this currently is presenting all housing units, right? Right, Todd? It's not broken
yeah.
out by entity type. If you could break it out by,
Oops, sorry.
okay.
Yeah, I can show you just the mega ones.
I think that's all we want to see, right? Because we're not really looking to see
Yeah,
how
I
many
think the
rental units are in Colorado, are we? Because that's not necessarily in question, I don't believe. It's how many of the mega investors are potentially impacting.
Well, that's an interesting rhetorical point. I think probably we need to make sure that to get a fuller description, we may have to talk about all of those, at different points, right? And break things out by the entity. So that's
Is that in this
that
spirit
is one
of
of the
what our original purpose was?
that is one of the things that CFC is going to do when we discovered that we think that there was a real difference between smaller, remember we talked about the mom and pop owners as opposed to the more, the larger entities.
So I would like to see just the mega investors. Can we see what that looks like?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is what it's showing now.
The red dots are
Yep.
mega investors. So
Yep.
saying they own more than 100 units.
Whatever the 5 is, I'm not sure.
It's 1,000
Or 1,000. Is that what you said?
nationally, right?
So your red dots are owned by entities that own more than 1,000 units.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up on that? But that could be builders too, right? That own over 1,000 units, not necessarily institutional investors.
So the mega ones are, we ask them to specifically identify some of the largest institutional investors in the nation. Okay, so this is not entities that own more than 1,000 units in Colorado. So the megas
I think that's what we want, though. We want the ones that own more than 1,000 units in Colorado, right?
Well, I don't think that there are any, but we'll have to confirm that because
I would be interested to just see the national ones too, the mega ones, the way they're defined right now.
Sorry. Well, this is just a rhetorical point, to describe the landscape. We've talked quite a bit about the differences in size of ownership, right? So we will need to address sort of, all of the categories and then look more closely at the individual, some of the specific categories, focusing on the larger entities, right? Because it's very clear, at least our understanding, I think, is that the smaller entities are of a really different type than the larger ones. And, while we may end up spending a lot of time talking about the larger ones in the final reports that we produce, I think it's necessary to begin with including the smaller ones to make that distinction.
What I'm going to do is I want to make sure there's no outstanding questions about the map that's been presented. I understand there's a lot of questions about what we're not seeing and different iterations of this. But in just the next couple of minutes, we're going to need to move on to a conversation about what we do know enough about and where you want to identify future studies needed. Are there any continuing questions for Todd or Adam about what's mapped here, what is or isn't shown, or any specific regions you'd like to see? Okay. Todd, thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to...
Sorry,
Heidi?
I'm slow to raise my hand. I think I guess I just feel like, particularly for the benefits of folks who aren't on today, it would be useful just to have some we've done this all verbally, right? Like we think that, that 1 signifies this and 5 signifies that, just to put that in an email, have that in a legend somehow, because I mean, we're sort of talking through this, but if one were to just look at the map, it's not clear what it represents or what it means. And I think, Todd, it's amazing. You did a terrific job. I appreciate how much work it takes to create this, but just having, make a memo about this is what the map is, this is what it shows, this is what the data points show, particularly when I hope the task force is able to look at this, because I do think it would be illustrative to be able to, we have a lot of underlying data on race and ethnicity and concentrations, as well as I think we may have some permit data on like remodeling, fix and flips that could add some clarity to what exactly we're seeing. And it would be useful just to know what we're working with here, just to have a memo of definitions and then what the legend or what the variables that we're looking at represent.
Yeah, we'll do that before we put anything out publicly. That's part of the reason why we haven't put it out publicly
Awesome.
yet.
Thank you.
Heidi, thanks for calling that out. I think that's a great idea. For people who aren't part of this conversation, for people who are going to look at what you all have done, over the next year or more. With that, Todd, if I can get you to take that screen down, because I'm going to do some other sharing. We're going to spend time walking through kind of the framework of potential categories of ideas and the specific things you all have named. This is where I have the uncomfortable task of being very real about the timeline that we have ahead of us. We're sitting at April 30th. This task force is legislatively required to submit its report by the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30. The way things work with the executive branch, the substance of that needs to get over to the governor's office. They request 30 days ahead, which really means we're targeting a June 1 draft with some room to continue things like layouts and graphics and details. All that is me saying we have 30 days. And I think there's a reality. There's a lot more you all, I'm very clear, would love to get more data on, look at more analyses. And I think we're going to have a weighty section of any report on the work that still remains to be done. What I'd like to do is walk through the ideas you have put forward on what we think we are ready to advance. And there's very little of it that we've heard so far that is regulatory change. There's the different categories. So I'm going to walk us through this with a big open door for you to say, Barrick, I actually think that in 30 days we could learn this and make a recommendation. I don't want to at all rule that out, but I don't want us hanging on the maybes instead of drafting what we know needs to get done going forward. So I'm going to start off with a bit of screen sharing for a few here. In taking all of the ideas we heard from you in our last conversation, it really came down to 5 categories of potential actions. And you're going to hear me use the phrase actions rather than recommendations, because some of these are not specific recommendations. But those include a big piece around public awareness and education. And I think within that, there's multiple pieces. There's educating the public, there's educating government officials, there's educating about the scope of the problem, there's educating about the need for more information. Clear answer we've heard repeatedly is transparency of ownership and the challenges that exist right now on corporate entities that hold different corporate entities and not knowing when something is somebody putting in an LLC for a flip versus one of these megas outside of tracking all of their other holdings. Do they go to the same address, same registered agent? Well, we've got some ideas around improving the transparency of ownership. Under the category of regulation of ownership, and we put out the idea of anything from fees to fines to limits. There was very little, and that's why I even put this in parens. There's been very limited or suggestion that we're ready to regulate now. I will leave it absolutely open to today's conversations and the next month. If there's things we learn more and you think we're ready. Big category we've heard from all of you is around the additional study or analysis that needs to continue getting done, and that may be things that you call for in the upcoming year. And that kind of leads into the final category of continuous monitoring and the different means of working with the Secretary of State, with local clerks and housing authorities to understand when things, to the language that was identified on the last one, reach a threshold of ownership that it has a material and adverse effect on people's ability to secure housing. So I'm going to walk us through each of these and the ideas you've all surfaced. When we get to the end of these 5 categories, big conversation we had on others or things we may move forward with or want to look further at. But on the ideas for public awareness, these were the 4 things that surfaced in some of what we got from folks. The idea that there's a misconception about the percentage of housing owned by large corporations, and somebody suggesting that as we consider summary report, can we consider sharing some takeaways in regards to the conclusions drawn that we're unable to draw based on the currently available data and evidence, knowing as we were just looking where the pockets of corporate ownership are in the state and discussing those communities if they're already dealing with the issue. Elected officials, the different types of business entities and categories of residential unit ownership. Somebody said it'd be beneficial for the state to have a resource page at the Division of Housing on these topics. And finally, the idea raised of education and outreach to help existing homeowners understand their options when they're approached by investors or corporate owner companies, especially households who are in precarious financial situations due to job losses, medical debt. I know we've seen this in the event of disasters, and those who live in some of these early warning areas. So let me pause on this big category of public awareness, invite you to react to what your colleagues offered here through email and the survey. And are there other aspects of public awareness that you would want to advocate for or name specifically in the report coming from this task force? Taylor.
Thank you. So I would say one thing that I would like to see here that maybe it's implied, but I think we should certainly make it explicit, which is a public awareness about talking about misconceptions about the trade-off between homeownership and rental households. Basically, the point that we did see in recurring themes here, which is while it certainly is of concern if there's to the extent that first-time home buyers are unable to get their first-time homes because there's corporate ownership of those homes. Clearly a concern worth evaluating and contemplating. What's missing here is the benefit of renter households and their ability to access neighborhoods and the amenities within that neighborhood by virtue of there being rental single-family homes in those neighborhoods. So there's a trade-off. And so I think that would be worth as part of the public awareness discussion, that acknowledging that there is that trade-off.
Appreciate that. Reactions to that or additional thoughts on either what you see on screen or what you don't see on screen. What does the public, and public I'm using as broadly as the average everyday homeowner or renter or legislators or local officials, what would you like to see there be increased awareness of on this topic?
I think, oh, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'll let Heidi
Oh,
go.
that's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Frankie.
I think that it would be good to have some commentary around all of the factors that impact home ownership, right? And housing availability, just maybe some notes. And I think CHAFA, I think housing authorities, I think probably realtors all have good data around that. I know in Denver, in particular, well, actually in Colorado, the laws that were passed around, can't remember the exact name, but the condo laws that went into place that discouraged building of new condominiums 7, 8, 9 years ago on there, and how that impacted the creation of more inventory of entry-level housing. Just some observations on all of the factors impacting housing availability so that it's not just looking at it through this one lens would be important.
Understood. Appreciate that. Heidi.
Yeah, I just have a question about, these are sort of teeing up my thoughts about what the structure of the report would be. And I agree. I mean, in thinking through this, I feel like a natural organization would be, this is what we know about corporate ownership in general, through the academic research. This is what we know about corporate ownership in Colorado. This is what we don't know. Teo's brought up the question of fix and flips, which I think there's a whole body of research there that we might want to include about, since we've brought that up and we see that in the data and those pockets as concentration in the data too, may be useful bringing into that what we know and what we don't know, both the positives and negatives. It is sort of, I feel like in terms of the question on public awareness and providing an accurate and informative report to legislators who will be making policies and also local government officials, that's a way to structure the report that I think is getting at bullet 1, and then maybe bullet 3 as well.
No, I appreciate that. And, we haven't, because we wanted to have this conversation first, we haven't even started putting together the framework of the report, but I think you're absolutely right. It will describe the charge given to this group. It will describe the process you all have undertaken. And then, Heidi, I think that's a perfect framing of it, of here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's where we think future action can help us know more. And therefore, we've identified these categories for action based on those pieces. But we'll continue to work with you on how to structure that. I will leave it open for us to come back to the public awareness as we continue. I'm going to go to the next one, which was around transparency of ownership. And rather than me just being story time and reading it to everyone, I'll give you all a minute to look through these three, which get to some of the fundamental points. But I'd love to then dig in with all of you. We need to translate this to ideas for action to be taken when it comes to the transparency of ownership. And part of that's going to be where, when, and by whom is this information required and collected to drill into that. Heidi, you've already got your hand up.
I apologize to interrupt, but can you go to the prior slide? Because I feel like we didn't hit bullet 4 adequately. Which is really that's really thinking more, I think I wrote this, but this is really thinking about educating the public, not sort of public awareness about big picture, is this a policy issue, but really sort of your, average homeowner who may be approached by investors or corporate owners to sell their home. I mean, I do think we haven't really discussed this, but thinking about getting to action items that actually help the person as opposed to sort of setting regulatory like top-down policy. I'm just curious if people have reflected on that or think that may be an area that we should think more about. Sorry, it goes back one more slide.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really thinking about education outreach, not for a legislator, a policymaker, a local government official, but really to people. So they are smarter about how they might be approached under, by a corporate owner and what their decisions are.
Yeah, understood. Leah, did you want to talk on public
Yeah,
awareness or on
I just was
transparency?
going to respond. And again, I don't remember research about anything specifically predatory about investors maybe buying. So I might not remember that any research about that appropriately, but I would just say, I think Frankie kind of made a comment around just home ownership in general. And there is a value, and Teo said this too, in renting and becoming home ready and mortgage ready. And so I do think when you're talking about education and outreach, it's more, to me, there's a value in making sure people understand their resources in regards to down payment assistance, home ownership education. Tenant rights is part of that too, but I guess this specific point around being approached by investors, maybe Heidi, you can expand on that. That doesn't resonate as much with me, just because I'm not sure about if there's a concern about any sort of predatory behavior. I think, we all get calls and notes on our door and emails around, hey, if you're interested in selling, and, text messages. So it may be kind of hard to for most homeowners to ascertain who's sending that out, and if there's, I guess, any sort of manipulation involved. But I just don't remember that being part of what we looked at.
And I will just, building on what both of you have offered, I will throw out, Carrie and I are here to support you all and to draft the recommendations you determine based on your work are appropriate. I will continue to push us to stay focused on the charge of HB 1253, of what you were tasked with looking at and what you have actually examined. I think there's a lot of smart people that have a lot of opinions on the full range of housing issues, whether that's the interest of developers or whether that's what happens to the individuals. And I would just urge caution to stay focused on what this task force is charged with looking at and what you have actually studied. Doesn't mean you can't make additional notes of surrounding factors like the benefits and the risks of ownership and rental and of their presence. But let's keep focused on what we have examined. With that, I am going to move us back to the transparency of ownership, because I want to make sure we tackle all of these today and talk with you about the stakeholder engagement we're about to undertake. Let you look at these. I would love specific thoughts. We need to put forward recommendations for action, not just that there should be transparency, but if you have ideas of specific points in the system of what should be collected, and whether you have ideas on how we address out-of-state corporate entities that may use registered agents, and does Colorado take a different approach when it comes to this ownership of requiring more transparency?
I'll go briefly if no one else is up. I would say I think this is probably a good place for it to fit, which is to talk about the typology of the different corporate owned assets. And what I mean by that is, I know we've talked about, so I'll keep it real short. But acknowledging that it's not obvious to people who aren't spent a lot of time looking at this, that there are a lot of different reasons that a corporation might own an asset, from fix and flippers who are returning the asset into the wild, to transaction buyers like iBuyers, like Zillow, for example, to developers that are building for homeowners, and the short term or build to rent developers. I think this would be probably where that should live. But an acknowledgement that not all homes that are owned by a corporation are doing the same thing, and that would be that's part of public education, but it's also part of transparency in terms of thinking about that typology.
Thanks, Teo. Other thoughts on transparency? Either what you want us to have that transparency into. Is it who the end user is, or end owner is? Is it how many units they own in a community, in a county, in the state, nationally? Is it true beneficial interest up to any holding companies? What's the type of transparency you think should be available? And is that transparency to government regulators and housing authorities, or is it to the general public?
I guess I can speak. I think that, the
Thank you.
task force was really, the point was to try to understand large corporate owners. And it felt like that was really challenging because you even have some people that put their primary residence in the name of an LLC just for privacy purposes or estate planning purposes. And so I think, how do we understand the large corporate, because ownership and how that evolves and changes. And again, I'm not sure who the regulating body is. And it would be interesting to look at other states and understand who has successfully collected this data and by what regulatory agency or municipality or just I don't know enough about who's done it successfully and what they do with the data.
Appreciate that. I think most of you know I'm not afraid to call, and I want to make sure we get some voices in here. So, Frankie, I'm going to call on you and then Heidi.
I don't know what my answer is maybe on this one. I think I tend to agree with what Leah said, that the initial concern is on those large investor owners who buy up swaths of housing that may be available to individuals. So I guess I would say that would be the data that I think would be in the spirit of what we were asked to look at as a task force. I think the only way you could capture that is if you did it at purchase closings and had it recorded at the county level. And then you would have to have a resource from the state to aggregate that data and make it available, I would say, to the public, probably.
Heidi, your thoughts on transparency of what and to whom?
Sure. I mean, in my mind, the primary audiences are first the legislature, and then secondly, local governments who will enact policies. And I think providing information about what we know, where we struggled, as Leah's saying, Leah and Frankie are saying, in terms of what compromises or what constitutes a corporate owner, and what Teo was saying, which are bad actors or not bad actors, or which transactions are problematic and not, just really giving them information about what we debated, what we know, what we don't know, and then sharing information like the map that allows them to be able to be thoughtful about their policymaking would be a primary deliverable to me, in addition to helping the public understand what's going on in the market and the state, what could go on in the future, and also what they can do about it.
And what we're going to be doing with all of these is taking this, working with you to structure some questions for a stakeholder listening tour, and then bringing that back to provide draft suggestions to all of you. The next big category is this question of regulation. And I'll take away the suspense. 3 of these 4 say there shouldn't be any regulation. If you look at the third bullet, one of your colleagues does think there may be room if we can dig into what the state policies should be. Should there be some type of fee at a particular number? I'll let you read all of them. I'd call your attention to that third bullet. And then let's have a little conversation of, does anyone want to advocate among your colleagues that we're ready at this point to suggest regulation? Some people, I think, are at the point of absolutely no, and we wouldn't even know what it was. There's a middle ground I've talked with a couple of you about who reached out of, should we say we're not ready to advocate regulation, but when we know these pieces or when we have access to this data, the state should be prepared for?
I'll go first so you don't call me out again.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, no problem. So I think my opinion is we're not anywhere near knowing what to recommend for our regulatory changes. I do think that data collection is needed. I think this last bullet point is the one I wrote, right? Because data around home ownership is point in time and constantly in flux. And so if you want to see if this is an issue that's impacting home ownership, maybe the state could fund a data collection project, and there could be some trending analysis completed over the next couple of years to inform legislators or other task forces on whether there is an issue and if solutions need to be brought forward.
Other thoughts? Does anybody want to make the case either that we are ready to make certain, even if narrow, regulatory recommendations, or we're at a point where you would advocate to your peers, it's not time to implement this regulation, but we know if we had this data, this type of regulation should be considered?
I'll just add a couple thoughts. I think the struggle is that we don't know what kind of regulation works yet. And so, I mean, it's an interesting bullet 3, sort of interesting to think about, could there be some kind of fee assessed under certain circumstances to help stabilize low to moderate income residents who may be adversely affected? Fees generally require some kind of a nexus. And so I feel, I don't think like as a task force, I don't feel like we're there yet. I don't think we know enough about what works, which is important in policymaking in Colorado.
And that may be a perfect segue to what are our last 2 slides from all of your input. And I'm going to show them both and then come back. We've got additional study or analysis to conduct, and then we've got continuous monitoring. And I think these end up bleeding together. There's some clear things, some of which Heidi has just surfaced of what do we know that works other places? Things like how are other states defining this? What or interventions have been enacted in other places? Take a minute and read this slide, and then I'm going to go to the continuous monitoring so you see where some of the intersection may be, and then we'll talk about both. come back to this one in just a second, but this is the continuous monitoring that folks brought up. And a lot of these came with side notes of this is what we would need to know to be prepared to respond when or if there is that material adverse effect. Are we okay for me to roll back to the previous slide for us to talk through? So we'll go back to the additional study or analysis. Are there things on here, given the conversation we've had for the last hour, that are standing out to you, or when you think about what Todd shared with us, do these feel right? Are there things that really stand out? Are there things that you would advocate in this section of a report to say, based on what we don't know, but we think might be, this study needs to be undertaken, or this data needs to be further parsed? Let me flip this a different way, and I'm going to ask each person. If you could call on the state to do two pieces of further study or data analysis, what would they be, and what would you want to learn from those? And I'm going to go around the whole horn. So, Leah, I'll go to you first, and then Taya.
Yeah, I just think at this point, I mean, we've all said it, but the data collection seems to be the problem that we ran into, and maybe the problem that we would recommend that the state look at solving. I think because we were not really able to fully understand the impact of corporate ownership in Colorado, I think it's not clear there's a problem there to solve at this point, but maybe it is just making sure we can understand as things evolve. I would want to make sure we're preventative in nature. So I think some of these questions here around, like, how does it affect rents in surrounding areas? Are there certain early warning neighbors or neighborhoods that are vulnerable? That's maybe the analysis that I would look at. First you need to collect the data and then come up with a strategy to understand what is the trigger point for when you would recommend, or be at a point where you could recommend additional legislation, perhaps.
Taya, and then Avilia.
Excuse me. So it's what will surprise none of you, my thoughts on this, but the one that stands out to me here, which for the record I did not write, but it certainly resonates with me, which is the how does corporate ownership affect rents in the surrounding area? So again, I think that it's noted in the bill that was signed into law about this task force, but kind of only a glancing reference, which is what is the impact on renter households, specifically how does to the extent that there is corporate ownership of single family homes, the question is how does that increased availability of renter housing stock impact renter households, vacancies, rents, neighborhood access, all that stuff. And that would typically be seen, again, no surprises here, as a benefit. The more options that people have to rent households, if they're a renter household, the more options they have, the better for them. And so I think having an honest appraisal of the flip side of this, and looking at the fact that there's more than one side of this discussion in terms of consumer surplus, then I think that would be the thing that I think is missing for a lot of discussions. And I think that's where, so that's high level issue. I think when we talk about later on this idea of kind of early warnings, I think we have to be very careful about that, because we're putting in just the language of saying an early warning system suggests that we do know there is a danger, and we can articulate what that danger is, and that's not clear that we're at that point. And so I just think I have to be very careful about that, about the language in terms of that and how we express what we know to be true, and which is the larger circle here, the things we don't know, as we've spent a lot of time looking at this. So impact on renter households, big idea.
Both your points and the flag on language are noted, and I appreciate it. Avilia, and then Frankie, and then Heidi.
Yeah, there are three main points that I would suggest for additional study or analysis. One is we have a good understanding of the sort of shortcomings of the data as it currently stands. So there's a lot of recommendations that I can make regarding that. We can do some name analysis and some other different matching techniques that have been done in other studies. We can do, like Heidi mentioned, look into permits and remodels to look more at what's going on in the flippers activity. And like Theo mentioned, we can also try to remove builders from the current data as we have, or for tracking purposes. That's one, and there's probably more. As when I look into the Colorado futures, I'll have more ideas on that. The other one is, I think regulation of ownership is very hard in the US in general, but I think we can certainly study policies that are beneficial for renters and owners, especially low-income renters and owners in many markets, but that would also help in this situation. I think there's other research that shows how we can do that. And the last part is, following, again, keeping update and summarizing academic and research papers that look at this topic, because I'm sure more are coming out. I recently saw a paper that based on the structure of ownership sort of looks like what happens in the market in terms of the welfare of owners and renters. So while renters gain a little bit of welfare by gaining access to different markets, owners lose a lot of welfare through reduced ownership opportunities. So at least this paper doesn't see it as a benefit. Sees the scales on the cost of lost ownership outpace the benefits of rental opportunities, and it's easy for the state to keep tab on all these new papers coming up.
Thank you. Frankie, and then Heidi, thoughts on the study or analyses that you would prioritize?
I think just what everyone's already said, and I think what I've already said as far as data and just having data on this single factor that is one of many that impacts home ownership trends, so that it's available when there are discussions that legislators want to have around accessibility to home ownership for the various categories of potential homeowners in Colorado, and then looking at how we compare to other states across the country.
Heidi?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to reiterate what folks have said. Number one is, and building a little bit upon what Theo asked for, I do think the impacts on both renters and existing homeowners, both positive and negative, which is really the research does sort of cancel itself out in some ways, but is useful. I mean, I think that it would be great to just really articulate that. This is, again, what we know, what we don't know, what to be aware of as markets shift, and then interventions that have worked and not worked, and then providing current data and information, as Avilia said, for decision makers would be keeping that up. This is great data. It's really unusual to have this map and this compilation of the best research that's been done in the country in one place, and I wouldn't want to lose that benefit.
And so that I think does take us well into the continuous monitoring. There's those studies. I'm hearing from so many people that what we need to do is be better about the data, which is the data collection, which is the transparency of it, and then what it is we're monitoring. What I took from all of the discussions was really the continuous monitoring to identify early on, without using the language of things like early warning, but to identify as quickly as possible when this is starting to approach that threshold of materially adverse effect. Would anybody like to highlight anything on the continuous monitoring, recognizing we want to be ambitious with what we ask for? We're also going to be asking local jurisdictions with limited budgets and a state that is, had to cut $1 billion from our state budget this past session. What would you prioritize asking to be monitored, and by whom? Let me ask this. Is the most important monitoring who owns how many, or is it about monitoring the pain point of access to rental or for sale units? Or is it both? And seeing where there's either correlation or causation. Leah.
Yeah, I think Frankie said it earlier, but in my mind, there's no mechanism in place to collect the data, and the data should be collected at the purchase transaction. So I think if there's a recommendation to make a requirement, for the data collection, I mean, it feels like that's imperative.
And Leah, just playing devil's advocate a little bit, point of purchase will obviously capture when we change ownership. It leaves the bulk of properties us not knowing. Is there a case to be made to do some work to analyze that, or do we need to just build a go forwards? Should there be a periodic, whether it's on refi, when it's on property assessment, that we get more to that true ownership? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that is a good thought. I mean, again, it could be anytime a deed of trust is filed that is a requirement to collect that data. But it would be interesting to learn if other states have been able to collect this data more effectively, other than in a go forward fashion.
Yeah. Other thoughts on what you would prioritize for that continuous monitoring? Is it the concentrations? Is it total ownership? Is it megacorps? Is it all?
I think it's megacorps if we're going to prioritize something, because there's just too many possible scenarios for all the other small entity ownership as far as the reason. And if it's not the mega owners, they're not really having a large impact on the overall market.
I agree with Frankie, and I would also take the one step further and say concentrations. I think that where this is happening is really important, and tells us a lot about the motivation of the owners and what's happening to renters and owners as a result of their activity.
In our last 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to shift gears pretty significantly, and that's to stakeholder engagement. Part of what we are here to do for all of you is go get a lot of additional perspectives. So we're going to be putting together a little bit of a listening tour through some webinars. These are the big categories of stakeholders that we've kind of refined it down to based on conversations with all of you. My questions are twofold. One, are these the right categories? Are we missing someone? And when you look at any or all of these, what would you want to ask one group or all of the groups? Is it workshopping some of the very concepts that we've just walked through and sharing with them the limits and getting their reactions? Do you have specific questions you'd want to ask them? So feel free to lean in on either who we should talk to. And thank you to everybody who's filled in that spreadsheet. We've got a good group going, and we'll use that as well as a lot of the professional associations like CML and others. But have we covered who we should talk to? And what do you want us to ask them? Tell you, I'm going to pull you in from kind of the professional side. From you,
Sure.
you've had a number of thoughts on the developers and others.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would, I think if it fits anywhere, it fits here, which is a question of to ask the specific question, what data are you basing? If you have a perception, what are you basing that data on, or that perception on? What data are you basing it on? Because maybe they do have data that we have overlooked, that this task force has not seen. I worry about the perception, because I think it's fair and appropriate to ask, what is your perception? I think that's what's your opinion is a very good and healthy question to ask. But I think one thing which I think has become clear over the course of this task force is that there has kind of been a perception of lots and lots of corporate owners are coming in and swooping up houses, and that's a very bad thing. And I don't think we've found evidence that either of those is true, at least in a way that materially impacts the market. That's the key thing, is that in a way that materially impacts the market, in the experiences of homeowners and renters. And so what I would just say is, I think it's worth asking their opinion, but I would certainly follow up that question with, is on what are you basing that opinion? So that's my because I think you're going to get people who will say, as was the formation of this task force, in the embedded assertion of this task force is, it's happening, it's a problem, and something needs to be done about it. And so I would just be aware of that potential implicit assumptions.
Absolutely. And I think part of our task is to bring all of you, both people's professional experience and their lived experience, to share that with you, and for all of you to digest it and consider that, based on what it is and how you are approaching it, and why you were asked to serve on this task force. Heidi or Avilia, and I don't want to pigeonhole anybody, I just am thinking of what relationships people have. Are we getting this right in getting micro community perspective? And who should we be talking to, and what should we be asking folks?
I just have a couple of thoughts on what to ask. I think it's worth asking people like how they feel about corporate ownership, if they have concerns, or what they know about it, what they don't know, what they'd like to learn, but also kind of to our discussion, what information do they feel like they need, or what would they like to know? And then if they know of any other localities or states that are addressing corporate ownership in a way that they feel they would recommend. And I don't mean that regulatorily. I mean, you could have, some people just say, I think this is a hands-off thing. I mean, this is such a local control state that I feel like for this task force really needs to do some due diligence to get the voice of a wide variety of people like you're suggesting, to understand the range of opinions on what should be done.
Avilia, anything that you would layer in there?
Yeah, I agree with everything they've said. I think getting a little bit more into like the sort of like the lived experience. I think we had a very good presentation by a lawyer from the Colorado Center on Law and Policy of like what a bad actor looks like. And if they have some more examples, or they're seeing different trends in terms of increase or reduction of those sort of practices going on. It would be interesting to learn more of what is it like for people who end up living in those type of housing arrangements.
Leah, I'm not discounting your personal lived experience, but I'm going to lean on your professional experience and ask you, what do I need to talk with real estate professionals, developers, lenders, and other industry folks about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess even in my professional experience, I just think about the process of getting the data, and I think about the assessor offices, and you even brought up, some counties that have limited budgets. And so I think just understanding, if we make a recommendation that we need to gather better data, logistically, what does that mean? and what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. So I think that's important. I also would just again say, I think defining corporate ownership, that's been brought up, but understanding other perspectives on that. I mean, again, I brought it up. I've personally, originated mortgages for people buying a primary residence in the name of an LLC. So I worry a little bit about, just the definition and just making sure we have a really clear idea of that. So I think that would be something that we would want to lean on other lenders and real estate professionals to just totally understand ownership structure and make sure we're delineating it appropriately.
Frankie, I'm going to give you the last words on this one.
I think what Leah articulated just now is in alignment with my thoughts, so nothing to add.
Perfect. I appreciate. It's always tough when you've got smart colleagues who go first and you're trying to hit cleanup on them. I'm going to invite. Let me just walk through what next steps are going to be given our timeline, and then I'll open it up to final comments from anybody if you've got them. As I said, we have a very tight timeline. We're looking really at 30 days to have a draft that has enough substance we can share with the governor's office so they know what is going to be coming out of this. To be very clear, they don't push back on the content. This is for us to just let them know from a policy lens what you all may be recommending. And then we'll be spending the month of June making it, doing all the proofing, making it look pretty, making it very digestible. My experience, having run probably 50 of these groups, the longer the report, the less it gets read. The finer the font, the more likely it's not read. So what you're going to end up seeing is probably a lot of infographics and callouts. We want this as accessible to as many readers as possible. So the month of May, for the next 20 days, we're going to be doing a couple things. We're going to go talk to these stakeholders. We're going to take these discussions and try to distill them down into what are the ideas for action. We'll be building out the framework that Heidi named for what does this report look like, and how we're structuring this to say, here was the charge. Frankly, we will probably name what the charge was not, so people are clear why we're not addressing some issues. We'll get into what the process was, what it was identified as known and what isn't known, and therefore here are the ideas in these different categories, and we'll include in there summary of what we heard, not just from you, but from all of the stakeholders. So that will be the very busy work of the next 35 days. I will tee up, that's going to mean I'm going to reach out to you with a Google document and ask you to layer comments in there, because we're simply not going to have enough time to do multiple versions of this and convene everybody onto a call like this. So we'll be moving pretty quickly in an asynchronous approach like that. Does anybody want to offer any final words on the ideas, where we stand, and what's going to land in this report for Carrie and I to hear as we get ready to draft, for Adam as we collaborate with the office, or for your colleagues? Teo.
I'll go very briefly. This has been brought up by several of the task force members in this conversation, but I'll at least try to crystallize it here, which is a crucial kind of meditation in the report about distinguishing between the actors and the behavior and the outcome. And I think that's a major point that I don't think we have really good information to come down on, which is to say what is really important here. Is it identifying the actors, or saying this is the outcome that we don't want to see, and focusing on that outcome. Again, it's we heard from our discussions by Background Barrick about from a group that manages a manager of single-family home rentals that pointed out that when managed by a larger corporation, their experience has been that they're able to put in capital improvements and adhere to the very understandable regulations for safety for rental housing, where it's a little bit harder for perhaps mom and pops to do that. And so there was a kind of a flip thing there about thinking about the behavior and the outcomes. And asking ourselves the honest question of to what extent is that tied to corporate owners or having mega landlords versus small landlords. So I'd like to see that expressed somewhere in the report. I think you can think through where it fits best, but outcomes is what I'm thinking about.
I appreciate that. Adam, any parting words of wisdom for us?
This has been a very interesting and positive discussion. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us and staying with us. We will have to decide in a bit whether we're going to have time to meet in May. It may or may not be feasible, but we will get back to everybody about that. And then we are looking at the end. We expect that we're going to get the results from the Colorado Futures Center in the next month, next few weeks, probably certainly by the end of this week, and then we will have opportunities to sort of wordsmith the various documents to come up with something that represents what we are starting to see as a developing consensus among the group. So thank you, and we're going to have a fun month. It's going to be great.
All right. On that note, my sincere thanks for letting us dive in with you and for all the thinking today. We'll follow up by email. If you have more thoughts on either what's in that deck or other stakeholder questions, shoot us an email, but we'll start reaching out to you over the next week to 10 days about that stakeholder listening sessions. So you know when they're happening and you get the invites to share with your networks. Other than that, we'll be in touch by email and reach out to me with anything that comes to your mind. Thanks all.